Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another literature review. As you can tell from up there, it's the next entry in the Dark Tower. It is the third book, and like I said in the previous two videos, it is the novel where the series really began to pick up steam. It is The Dark Tower 3, The Wastelands. Named for the T.S. Eliot poem of the same name, which that poem is quoted several times throughout the book, and even the two big sections it's broken up into are named after quotes from that poem. One of them, I think, sums up the novel and parts of the series well, and that line is, "I will show you fear in a handful of dust," which is the ending part of the section quoted at the beginning. I'm not going to read the whole thing, that's just the final line. It's the name of the first half of the book. The second half of the book is A Heap of Broken Images, which sums up the Gunslinger's world perfectly, because it does seem like a broken down version of our own, and we do recognize a lot of familiar things, but broken down. As the Gunslinger has said, the world has moved on. This novel was published in 1991 in August, and it won the Bram Stoker Award for Novel, which pretty big deal for authors. I don't know if that's their version of the Academy Awards, but since it's named after Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, it's one of those things that's big. Only thing I could probably think of to be bigger would be the Nobel Prize for Literature, and then probably a Pulitzer, but I don't know if you can get that for novels. I know you can get those for articles, but I don't think you can get it for novels. It was published by Grant, and the artwork in the book is done by Ned Dameron. Now, I don't know if he did this cover art specifically. I'm going to assume he did because he's credited, but he did all the artwork within, which this is probably one of my favorite art styles in all the books that have art. I definitely like it better than the art in the following one. That's very abstract, but I like the more straightforward art of this one. There's the rose that becomes an important little plot element from this book on. Now, that's a cover in certain editions, so I think that's actually a better cover art than this one, but that's a pretty good one. That's a different version of the rose, though, so it fits. I'm going to only show one more. One of my favorite images of Roland, probably my favorite one is the cover art for the last novel chronologically, but that's a close second. The story picks up a little bit after the end of the drawing of the three. Roland is fully healed, at least from the fever. He still has a mental anguish from his little encounter with Jack Mort, because he took Mort out of the timeline before Mort could push Jake. So he's suffering a little mental disorder, to where he has two parts of his mind going, there was a boy, there was no boy. Because since Jake did not die in his world, he could not have come to Roland's world, so there's two conflicting memories there. And in Jake's world, he's suffering the same thing, but I'm jumping a little ahead of myself there. He's been training Susan and Eddie in the ways of the gun, and they picked it up pretty well. Now, as the training goes along, Roland eventually tells them about his mind problem, and they figure out that perhaps Jake is suffering the same thing, and that maybe he'll have to be drawn too. Now, they figure this out when Roland throws the jawbone into the fire, and Eddie sees a vision of a key. A new plot element that the novel introduces about him is that he likes to whittle, or at least did before he got into heroin. And of course, he's still suffering from his brother peeking to him in his mind. Oh, look at the sissy, ain't that cute? Stuff like that. Now, he sees an image of a key and begins to carve it out of a piece of wood. Now, as they're continuing on their journey, at the same time, Jake is dealing with the same issue that Roland is, but his thing's a little different. Every time he sees a door, he opens it and thinks he's going to see Roland's world. And of course, all the memories of the events that transpired between him and Roland in the first novel are playing through his mind. And then when it reaches the end, it replays, and of course, he has that same mental argument. And it is affecting his schoolwork, because when he has his English final, he writes this really abstract essay like, "The Gunslinger is the truth." It goes all like that, and it introduces a new plot element about this thing called Blaine is a pain. Apparently he's a train, a monorail to be specific, and it becomes a goal that they have to reach in the second half of the book, and leads to the novel's ending, which is a cliffhanger in an almost literal sense, since they're on a monorail, and it leads to the beginning of the next book, but I'll get to that when I talk about that book. Now, as you can guess, eventually Jake does make it to Midworld and is reunited with the Gunslinger, which is a very emotional moment, and he promises Jake he'll never let him drop again, which he doesn't in the same sense of, go now, there are other worlds than these. But there is another emotional moment further into the book, and then later on in the series it connects back to this moment. Now, when Jake comes through, it's not through death. He has to come through another door, similar yet different than the one that Susan and Eddie went through. But it's in a place that is very, very creepy, and it kind of seems like the house on Nebold Street from It, if you were to combine the house with Pennywise himself, because it's the house that is alive, and it's a very creepy scene. And if they were to do this scene in a live-action movie, which, since the movie itself seems to have elements from the book, they're probably going to put this in there, but change the context. I hope it's creepy like how this scene came out, just because reading it is like, ooh. And of course, the It connection, there's a couple spiders in there, so. Now, as the characters, once the group is together, they move through the world, they encounter old people, both friendly in a small town and mean in a city called Lud, which is basically Midworld's equivalent of New York City, only it's run down because, as I've said before, the world has moved on. Another element that the novel introduces is the Guardians and the Beams. The Beams are beams of energy that hold up the Dark Tower, because the beams, there's 12 of them. They go to the center, so there's like 6 pathways, and if they follow the path of the beam, they'll eventually hit the Dark Tower. Now, at each portal ending is a Guardian, and at the beginning of the novel, they meet the Guardian of the Bear, Shardik, who is named after a book that was written by the same author that wrote Watership Down, which is kind of loosely mentioned in the dialogue. When Eddie hears the name, he's like, it makes me think of rabbits. Now, Shardik is a cyborg, so he's, giant bear that's half bear, half machine, and he's sick, so the organic part of him is dying, and leads to a very interesting opening fight scene that would be amazing on film, but I doubt we'll ever see it. And it really shows that Susan has taken to her training well, because she doesn't shoot with her gun, she shoots with her heart, which is another element that is introduced in this book, the Gunslinger Creed, which is one thing I'm surprised King didn't add in when he went back and rewrote the original book, but I guess he figured now I won't put it in. Might come off as a little tacky if Roland's thinking it while he's doing this, because he doesn't really need to think it, because he's lived by it for so long, it just comes to him second nature. But an apprentice gunslinger like Eddie and Susan, they'll need it. And of course, another long-time King character makes an appearance, or in the context of the Dark Tower series, as we find out, a reappearance in this book, and that is good old Randall Flagg. He doesn't give that name, but if you read how he's described and how he talks, you can tell it's Flagg. Now, this is the first time that Flagg is actually mentioned in the Dark Tower series as Flagg, but in retroactive continuity, he is mentioned to be both Walter and Martin, which you find out in the next book. That's a little jump ahead, but I just have to point that out, that it's the first time he's officially in the series, but with the retcon, it's not the first time he's in the series. It's a weird little thing, especially when you factor in the expanded edition of the first book. He does say one of the famous little lines from The Stand, "My Life for You," involving a character called the TikTok Man, who is a leader of one of the 2 groups in the city of Lud. We got the Pubes, and we got the Greys. The Pubes are the more crazy of the 2 because they do sacrificing, which Eddie thinks is from the song Velcro Fly by ZZ Top. Dun 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 dun. And of course, having heard that song since the first time I read this book, reading through it again, I did picture it in my mind every time I read the part about it. Now, as I mentioned before, the ending is a cliffhanger, which some people might think is a little bit of a cheat, and King does apologize in the afterword about it, but he's like, yeah, there's novels that write themselves like this one did. You gotta allow the characters to pause for a moment, check into customs and all that. And it picks up in the next book, and the next book's first 100 or so pages is resolving this cliffhanger and then continuing onward. And I have to say, beginning with a real contest with the character of Blaine, that's the perfect way to begin a novel, and for this, it's the perfect way to end a novel. Now, some of the lines of dialogue at the end of this one and the beginning of the next one kind of overlap a little bit because you gotta set it up, which works, which is why when I read that novel, I usually skip it, because I just read it, I don't need to reread it again. Now, if there's a while since I've read the previous book, I might, but since I'm reading them one after another here, no need to do that. As I mentioned before, this is probably my favorite of the Dark Tower novels. It's kind of hard to say for certain, but there's something about this one that draws me to it, but it's close between this one and the expanded version of the first one. They're kind of neck and neck. Once I've done with the reread, I'll probably be able to rank them properly, but as of right now, I'd say this, just by a smidgen, is my favorite of the series. And as I said a couple times already, it's where the series really begins to pick up steam, and it has fully forged its own identity, something that it would hold to for the rest of the series, and of course when King went back and did the revamp. Partially because Roland, you get to see a little bit more of what a gunslinger is about in this one, not just shooting.